With the campaign officially at the halfway mark, we're focusing today on what the federal parties are promising families.
Families.
It's the buzzword in this tight campaign, with all parties pitching to parents.
Only our Conservative government can be trusted to stick up for Canadian families, to protect them, and to put money back into their pockets.
The first batch of cash from the Tories' Universal Childcare benefit arrived in the mailbox 2 weeks before the election call.
Did you do this?
Liberals responded with a promise of their own: more money for low-income families and leave Canada's wealthiest families to fend for themselves.
For the Vahidi family, they'll receive more than $200 per month tax-free through our Canada Child benefit, $850 more a year than under the Harper plan.
You do that face for me.
The NDP platform put the focus on childcare, vowing to create 1 million new daycare spaces and cap the cost at $15 a day.
Childcare is one investment that we can't afford not to make.
The parent vote is one no party can afford to lose. To find out what promises are resonating with families across the country, we're joined this morning by 3 parents. Mother of 2, Elizabeth Booth, is in Calgary this morning. Father of 2, Kenny Badanis, is in Montreal. And mom of 2, Anjum Chaudhry-Nair, joins us in studio. And thank you all for being with us to weigh on this. You know, and we just said in the tape, I mean, families. We've been hearing a lot of it. I'll begin with you, Anjum. Does it get your attention when they start talking families?
I mean, of course. I think all families, you know, across Canada, we're just trying to be productive members of society and also support our families and just sustain ourselves. But I think there's a lot of families in need where at this point in the game, they really do need to hear that things like daycare, education, you know, elder care, and all of those things are on the radar of governments right now, of parties. Let me ask you, Kenny, of the promises that you've heard so far, what kind of most resonated with you?
What I really liked is when Justin Trudeau talked about extending parental leave. Already in Canada, we have one of the most generous parental leave programs in the world, but I think it can go even further. And strangely, one of the outcomes I hope to reap from that is that the United States will follow suit, because they are one of the worst as far as parental leave goes. So any program that will allow parents to spend more time at home, especially in that first year or two, I'm all in favor of that time.
And did you like that as well, Elizabeth, or was there something else that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think parental leave is important. I really like the NDP's focus on childcare. I think childcare can be a very, very stressful thing with the economy being what it is. It means that a lot of parents are having to go to dual incomes instead of single family incomes. So I think that childcare piece is really important for a lot of working parents.
And what about the NDP's plan? I mean, because they've been, and Tom Mulcair's talked about this long before even the campaign began. But, you know, he's talking about creating 1 million childcare spaces over the next 8 years. What about that? And let me just stick with you for a second, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think it's necessary. Anyone who has had to try to juggle either having very small children who need full-time care or school-age kids who need before and after school care, it's really, really difficult. The current system is not designed for working parents, and I think that needs to be addressed. I think the actual putting those spots in place is more important than cutting families a check, in my opinion.
Government daycare spaces.
I think that's a great. I mean, I definitely.
And capped at $15 a day.
You know, that definitely resonated with me. I mean, I'm one of the lucky few that had a great support system ahead of when I was in that situation. But I went to subsidized daycare as a child. My mom put me in that because she had no choice. She had to work. There was only one earner in the family, and these kinds of things really make a difference for those kinds of families in need. And lucky for me, I think every little bit helps. And for my mom and probably other for Canadians. 20, 30 years later, those kinds of steps help sustain families for the future and allow their children to then sustain themselves going forward, because they're able to save and put money aside for other things and then afford other schools and other programs. It's all about little things that can make a difference.
And let me ask you then, Kenny, about the daycare plan on behalf of the NDP, because a lot of people have talked about it. But the opposition then being is how can we Canadians afford it?
Well, I have some very strong feelings about daycare. My wife and I really worked on having a flexible schedule because we wanted to stay home. And I think daycare is a very necessary step. However, I am in favor of a graduated fee system because I have witnessed a lot of parents who don't necessarily need the daycare services, use the daycare services, which take up spots for parents who do want to and need to get back to work. I think that's one of the cornerstones of the daycare system is it's built to allow families and parents to be able to get back to the office and get back to work. And if those spots are being taken up by people who don't need it because they want to go about their regular daily activities, that is a real disservice and puts a real strain. And in Quebec, we have waiting lists that are 2 and 3 years long. I mean, women, for the most part, once you find out you're pregnant, you have to put your name on a daycare list. So I'm in favor of a graduated system, and I think extra spaces are great as long as those spaces go to people who need it.
What about the Tory plan? Well, it's already happened because you know checks were already cut before the campaign began. But what about the Conservatives and the child care benefit and adding to that? And I'll ask you, Elizabeth.
Well, I don't like that plan at all. I think most parents I've talked to at best think it's a little bit of mad money to maybe put their kids in a couple extra after school programs. And at worst, people think that their votes are being bought. I think the amount that those checks come to is not enough for families that are struggling to pay for childcare, and it's too much for people who just don't need it. I don't really see the point, and I don't really see that money actually, in reality, helping very many families at all.
Angela?
You know, I think that I know that the NDP and the Liberal platforms do have something in place that takes into consideration, you know, who those checks should go to, and it really should go to families in need. I think that there is something to be said about that. I mean, I think, you know, it shouldn't necessarily be completely universal. I agree with Elizabeth that we really want to make sure that it's going to those families that actually do need it and can use it, and so maybe more should be going to them compared to people that may not need it as much.
And certainly Justin Trudeau has, talked a lot about, exactly that, and having, over a certain income level that, you would not be receiving that benefit. And in fact, the wealthiest Canadians, as he says, would start, looking after the people or help the country look after the people that aren't. Let me ask you this, Kenny, when the delineation is made in the campaign, when we talk about families, and those lines are drawn between middle income earners, lower income earners, and to use Justin Trudeau's words, the wealthiest of Canadians, does that help families does the rubber hit the road when you start talking about that?
Well, I think it's smart in the sense that I think most of the people, the largest percentage of people to turn up at the polls are going to be middle income earners. I got into a wicked debate with people last night over this who were telling me that, look, the 1% earn their right to earn that money and they pay a huge amount of taxes. Their percentage is a little higher and they pay a lot more just because they're larger income earners. So don't they have the right to have access to things like universal daycare and the UCCB? So it depends what kind of society you want to live in. I absolutely agree with your other guests about the UCCB. I think their timing was off a little bit. I think that they pushed everything back a month or two. So you got that big fat several $100 check about 3 weeks before the election. That might have worked. But I think now people are having time to think about it. And I think appealing to the middle income earner is a smart way to go because you're playing the numbers. And I also think a universal UCCB, once you've had a couple of months to think about it, you're now looking at your $60 or $160 check and going, okay, but now what? I still don't have a daycare spot.
Elizabeth?
I still have to get back to work, and this isn't really helping me.
Elizabeth?
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I get those checks, and I don't really know what to do with them. They don't cover my summer's worth of daycare, and they might give my kids a couple after-school programs, which are sometimes necessary, sometimes not. It depends on the family. So I think just that blanket across the board check is not the best way to go at all.
Anjum, Kenny, Elizabeth, thank you all for weighing in and being part of our parent panel during this campaign. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you have a question for the parties about the promises for families, tweet us, post us on Facebook, or send us an email. The candidates are here tomorrow to respond.